And my partner leaned over and he says, my heart, shortly after collapsed, he looks at me and he says, hey, tell my wife I love her, tell my girls I love them. And I said, you're not gonna fucking die, you're a fucking Marine. We knew it was gonna be a runner. And sure enough, this SUV, woof, and speeds by us. All of us were hit with gravel. We're like, geez Louise, 2219, right? My Crown Vic. Jump in that thing, partner jumps in, whoop, right? Hit the lights, here's going. So we're going. The other vehicles, wow, like slammed into this guy, and I see smoke. It's a crash and burn. And I run in and I'm standing at the top of the triangle. I punch my gun out. I start squeezing the trigger, hoping that that's not what has to happen. We had a third country national compound on base and it got hit. You go in there and there's just mutilated bodies from a mortar attack hitting them. And imagine someone just takes you and places you in a large compound, turns the lights off and says, all right, we're gonna launch things that explode and it might hit you. You go to bed, you hear the faintest thing, you're awake. And it's something I've never been able to turn off. Couldn't do the 4th of July. The fireworks start going and you start crying and you're sitting in the car and you don't know why. I didn't know why I was crying or what it was just this response. The only way I can ever tell my story is to start at the beginning. I always lead with the preface, right? Who is Hector and why is Hector who he is today? I'm an immigrant to this country. I immigrated when I was 9, raised by a single mother who also raised 2 other additional great contributing humans in this great country. Growing up in Mexico, I still recall it, right? We didn't exactly live poor. My dad at the time was an architect, but according to the American standards, we definitely were poor. My grandma would wring the chickens. Everything was made fresh. Tortillas were fresh. Beans were fresh. I remember just, being a kid, running around the streets, sometimes naked, no shoes. And when we immigrated to America, my cousins at the time looked at me like I was a strange kid. I'd go out front. I'd build like a slip and slide with the mud at 9 years old and be out there running around naked. And they tell me stories later, right? They're like, dude, you're 9 years old and running around naked. And so they told my tia and eventually my tia had to talk to my mom like, hey, what's your kid doing? But I say that because there was a lot of innocence behind that. So when I came to America as a little immigrant kid, I didn't have any of the preconceived notions that a lot of the American kids had. And I grew up in El Centro, California, little tiny farming town, border town, just east of San Diego. The border town there is Mexicali. And so growing up there, it was, looking back now, like when you're in the moment, you don't realize how, I'm not going to say ghetto, but I guess maybe underprivileged my childhood was. And looking back now, living in San Diego and even just being anywhere in America, you look back and you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe my mom did so much with so little for so long. And I can't believe the things she did and to help us come out ahead. It took me a long time to really grasp and accept why we came to America. I think in order to really grasp the Mexican Latino community, yes, very much so, it's still founded on like the machismo side, but not so much anymore. But more so, there's a lot of pride in your last name, a lot of pride in who you are, how you represent the family. And when we moved to America, I didn't know why. We come to America, and I remember not even being here 6 months. And I remember my mom sitting me down in the room and she said, hey, mijo, I just want to tell you, your dad passed away. And so even just looking back, like looking at my nephews and nieces now who are 9 years old, right? If I were to tell them that their father passed, it would be heartbreaking. And I think it's one of the first times in my life where I learned how to compartmentalize something, right? Like I was forced to move on. I was forced to embrace a new religion. My tia, who we were living with, was a Christian and not Catholic. So I remember they took the little cadenita from my Catholicism away from me. And it was just a quick adaptation. Years later, I was 21, 22 years old. I finally called my mom and I said, hey, Mom, I want to finally know why, we moved to America and how did my dad die? And she said, hey, mijo, look, it was something I didn't want to tell you, but we'll talk about it now. I said, okay, Mom, what is it? She said, well, I was young and, your grandpa, and she tried to contextualize what I just mentioned, right? She tried to tell me, hey, Hector, what I'm about to tell you, there's a lot of other forces that were surrounded it. And I said, okay, Mom, what was it? And I said, well, your dad, in essence, told me that he was a homosexual. And I remember at the time when she said that, I remember hanging up, right? I was just shocked. I didn't know how to deal with that. I didn't. And she used the word homosexual because I think that's just the best way she knew how to convey it. And for many years, I was embarrassed. I hid that, didn't talk about it. But as a society, the more we've grown, the more we've educated ourselves, the more I've educated myself. I have a lot of gay friends now, and different people who identify as different things, right, in today's society. It took me years, but I remember when I finally came to grasp with it. And even now, I'll say this here, I wish that I could see my father one more time, and not for anything other than to give him a hug and say, "Hey, Dad, it's okay. You know, it's okay. You had 3 kids, you had a mom. I empathize with you. I can't even imagine at the time in the 90s, growing up in a Mexican home in Mexico, having to say that. And not only that, but saying it, losing your family, the world must have caved in on them. And so that's why we moved to America, my family and I. Moving to America at the age of 9, I mentioned to you talking offline. And again, my story, I want to share my story with little kids who are out there, right? Maybe there's parents out there right now listening to the story that are immigrants themselves and they have kids that are 9 years old. You got to imagine, and I think it's hard, when you tell a story, I was always taught to try and put the audience in that scenario. And a lot of the veterans that are listening to this, yeah, maybe you sat through a language orientation class before you went to Iraq, before you went to Africa, whatever that is. But being there and not being able to communicate with those people was challenging, right? And so imagine being 9 years old and being sat in a classroom with kids you want to play with and talk to, but you can't communicate with them. And you're that stranger, right, who's now in their classroom. You're kind of an alien, right? And I know that's what we use, a permanent resident alien, but I mean, you really were. And so what I did, I've always been a nerd. I wanted to teach myself the English language. I went to the library and I found a Roberto Clemente book, and it was a bilingual book. So I would highlight words that I'd hear in the playground, go back and say, oh, that's what that means. And I'd put together sentences. And little by little with that book, I learned how to speak English. My first curse word in America was shit. And I was watching Days of Thunder. And my mom was at my tia's house. I watched it and I run around and I'm saying shit. And she's like, what did you just say? And she throws a chancla at me, right? And so for me, that was my first exposure to learning the English language. Growing up, and I mentioned to you earlier, I know this is, again, a podcast. I had a drill sergeant growing up. My mom did not let us slip. She knew, hey, we're in America and we're in this. She saw it, right? There's people rolling around on bikes who we knew. Now you look back, you're like, oh my gosh, those people are on heroin. Like, thinking back, you're just like waving at people on bikes as a kid. You're just like, hey, what's up? Now you look back, you're like, don't wave at that kid, right? You tell your nephews and nieces, like, hey, what are you doing? No, don't talk to them. But growing up, my mom knew, hey, I've got to keep a close eye on these kids. And how does she do that? Well, she'd wake us up at 5 a.m. on Saturdays, 5 a.m. on Sundays. We were in every sport that she could potentially afford. My mom used to make little trinkets and we go door to door selling them. So entrepreneurship was instilled in my life at a very early age. Everything was homemade. We were in the kitchen with her, helping her. And so that was the construct of my family. My mom taught me hard work, grit, determination, perseverance. My mom, for the longest time, took pride in not having welfare or WIC. And I remember the first time she did that. I remember that drive. She was crying. We didn't know why. We're all in the car with her, and we said, "Mom, why are you crying?" She said, "Well, we're going to this church. I can't afford. Sorry, man. I can't afford food today. I'm crying because we'll get to the story eventually. My mom's passing. I look at my life now and how blessed I am, right? And to think back, sometimes when perspective kicks in, we're like, oh man, I'm going out and buying Gucci shoes or whatever the heck it is that you're buying, right? And you think back to your parents and how hard it was for them. And so I remember my mom, that drive. And it took years to understand why that hurt her so much. And because she was more embarrassed than anything in front of her 3 kids to show that she couldn't make ends meet. So I remember going to the WIC and grabbing, the box with the condensed milk and the powdered mashed potatoes or whatever it was. And as a kid, I was happy. I thought, man, this is awesome. We have peanut butter. I didn't see why my mom was crying, what was so defeating to her. And I think that went on for maybe about 2 or 3 months until she got back on her feet, and those cans stopped coming. We stopped going to that church that gave the food out. And I again, through her example, right, we call it servant leadership, right, transformational leadership, all these things that we know now of the different archetypes of leaders. My mom was doing it without even knowing. And so for me, again, raised very humbly. And going back to your story, that ties into who I am, again, the military and how my life prepared me. My tío owned a taco shop in El Centro, Roberto's Taco Shop. Everybody knows Roberto's. So my uncle, my tia, they owned a couple of Roberto's. I used to work the register for them. I'd leave high school, I'd skateboard over. I was a little skate kid, so I'd go over and I'd work. And at night, you'd have a back door. I worked the cash register, and in the military, right, it's fatal funnel, man. Like the back door opens, someone comes in, you get straight line to the money. And I never thought of that as a kid. And I remember one night, Saturday night, the first time we got robbed, we're working, and I hear someone shout from the back, "Hey, I'm in Linero, give me the money." I'm talking, right? The drive-thru's on this side, and I'm thinking, is the drive-thru, they mad that I didn't give him the burrito yet? And I thought, oh, okay. So I turn around, and there's a guy with a gun and a ski mask, and he's pointed right at me. And I'm staring at this guy, and he's like, "Dame dinero." And my uncle is off to the side. My otro tío, Ramon, he used to cut all the vegetables and stuff, and there's another guy holding him at gunpoint. And my uncle's just staring at me like, "Come on, just give him the money." And I think back, and I remember saying no to him, right? I was like, no. I don't know why I did it, but I said it. And there was a trash can right in front of me, and he points the gun and fires 2 rounds into the trash can. And in that moment, I go, oh my gosh. So I turn around, I bag all the money, I toss it at him. The guy flees and takes off, and I remember jumping, calling 911. We had a full house, right? A full house inside the restaurant, and everyone's yelling and screaming. And my heart's pumping, and man, it was crazy, right? When you think back now, you're like, oh my gosh, I was 14 years old, and this happened? It's crazy. The craziest thing happened after, though. My uncle says, "Hey, just tell the cops not to come. Let's just keep going." I'm like, "What do you mean, Theo? Like, I got to call 911. He's like, no, mijo. It's going to be worse if we call and they catch those guys and they know that we called 911 and they get them. So you know what, mijo? It's okay. Just get back to work." Like, okay, Theo. And we just went right back to work and forget 911. It was just like nothing happened. And so that right there, I think, was kind of shocking in building. Growing up as an immigrant, and I think you watch it now, Gary Vee is one of my favorite guys. Right? I love Gary Vee. And he talks about how every good immigrant goes to college, right? Go to school, get an education, get a good work, and get a good job. Be a good worker, mijo. And that's what mom taught me, right? She said, "Mijo, gotta go to school, get good grades, go to college, and make something of yourself." And so growing up, in that little construct, I had never seen a military person in my life. Like I didn't have any classmates that had military parents. The only thing I saw were cops, CHP officers, local police officers, obviously the border patrol running around. Back in the day it was INS. And if you worked for the government, you had a nice house, right? You lived in the nice homes. Back then they were called the Lewis homes. So you lived in the Lewis homes in El Centro. You also worked for like SDG&E, or you had a professional job. And looking back now, it's the system. If you work for the system, you're doing well. If you're a victim to the system, you aren't doing too well, or dependent on the system. And so for me, looking at that and saying, okay, I've got to go to school so that I can get one of these jobs, right? Whether it's as a cop or as a government employee of some sort. And I was focused on education. I think for me as a kid, again, having an entrepreneurial spirits, I wanted to go into business. You and I spoke before how I grew up in church, and I took a missionary trip to Lima, Peru, and I was sitting in an airport, and I remember seeing men walking with suits and a briefcase, and I said, one day I want to be a guy in a suit and a briefcase going to an important meeting somewhere, right? They're sitting there with their feet crossed, and they got the newspaper, right? And I'm like, man, that guy looks important. I don't know anyone that has a nice suit like that, right? And so for me, one day I show up to school again, the chancla, I bring that back up. There was no showing up to school late, man. Like I remember showing up to school late because I was skateboarding and probably like got sidetracked. And I was like, oh, even my heart's pounding now, right? Like having to call my mom or sit in the office I'll later tell you about my first fight ever in America. But showing up, there was a military guy. I couldn't tell you what uniform it was, right? And he says, "Hey, kid, you want to take the ASVAB?" At the time, I didn't know what that was. I was like, "Yeah, will they give me like a slip to go to class?" "Yeah." I run into the cafeteria. There's a bunch of kids in the cafeteria. Sit down, write your name, boom, take this test. All right. So I just take this test. Guy gives me a slip. I take off. Everyone was still working on it. I just like flew through it. Didn't really care, right? Get to class. And that was my first subconscious exposure to the military. I had no clue what that was. So I go to college, start my freshman retreat, meet a bunch of kids. Immediately, I knew I wasn't the same, right? Immediately, I knew I wasn't the same. I went to a private school in Riverside, and a lot of my classmates had nice shoes, nice clothes. Back then, our nets were cool, so everyone had our nets and like the O'Neill shirts and pants. I'm over there wearing like whatever swap meet stuff my mom bought me, right? Or whatever I could afford. And I remember my first worry was, I gotta get a job. So as soon as I went to campus, I asked the lady, I said, "Hey, are there jobs on campus?" And she says, "Yeah, mijo, you gotta go over to that board. They have jobs there." And all the jobs seemed to be taken except for janitor, post office. I'm like, done. So I grab the numbers, I call it, I go, I interview, and they're like, "You're hired." And looking back now, I'm thankful for those jobs, right? At the time, I didn't even think about it. Ignorance is bliss. I just gotta make money. But looking back now, being a janitor in the cafeteria after I've met all my classmates at the freshman retreat, and they're looking at me oddly, like, "What are you doing collecting trash?" I'm like, "Oh man, it's just, I gotta work." They're like, "Oh, all right." And this, the weird looks they give you, and there I am collecting trash in my little John Deere yellow cart around campus, and then delivering mail to the different classes. And one morning, September 11th, happened. I was vacuuming my hall. My classmates are all gathering around, and I'm looking inside, and I go, "Man, what's going on?" And we sit down, and I didn't have TV growing up. We had sporadic moments where we did have some television, but I never really watched the news or anything. And we're sitting there watching this, and I mean, it gives me goosebumps. I think all of us remember where we were on September 11th. It impacted us in a different way. And I remember sitting there after it all happened. Classes were called off, and I said, "Okay, I've got to give back to this country. I've got to give back to this nation that, to that point in life, had given me and my family so much, right? Food, water, shelter. We spoke about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We had that. It wasn't perfect, but this country had given us that, and I just wanted to give back." And so I remember calling my mom. I said, "Ma, I'm going to join the military." And of course, "No, mijo, no, you're not." I said, "Yes, I am, Mom. I got to go back. They attacked the country, and I got to serve." And I remember telling my professors, and they said, "Hector, wait till the semester's over, please." And I said, "I'll wait till the semester's over, but I'm leaving." And at the time, I had a mentor. I met some really cool friends that are still friends to this day in college. And Tim's dad, he worked in the banking industry, and I remember he took me under his wing. He said, "Hey, man, I'm going to help you, kid. One day I'm going to help you get into the business world." And I remember he said, in a way, I'm not speaking negatively of the military. What he said was, "Hey, in essence, just wait, finish your education, and then join the military." But I didn't listen to anyone. Anyone who knows me, when I have my mind set on something, I go, right? No matter what data I receive, I'm going. And so I decided to enlist in the military. And so after deciding to join the military, right, I said, "I'm going to join the military." I had to look up how you join the military. I remember the yellow book. Some of us remember what yellow books are. I remember grabbing the yellow book. And in the yellow book, they had big ads, like join the Army or Marine Corps, whatever it was. And so it said recruiting. So I called the recruiting office, and Gunny Heenan, his guy's like, "Oh, well, I'm a Marine." I'm like, "Oh, geez." He's like, "Hey, come on down. I'm gonna enlist you. How old are you?" I kind of go through the initial interview. "Are you taking an ASVAB?" "I don't know, man. I don't even know what that is." So I go down there, and sure enough, I go see the Marine recruiter. And they're all squared away. And when I walked in, I remember looking left and looking right, and there were other branches. And again, I'm an immigrant kid. I thought there was one branch of the military. I'm joining the U.S. military. So I walk in, and these guys look squared away, right? They get their tans on, the white hats are hanging on the thing. I'm like, "Ooh, that's cool." So he sits down, we talk. He looks at my ASVAB scores, like, "Oh, you're a smart one. Well, you're going to join the Marines." I'm like, "Okay, great. Let's do it." So he schedules me to go down to MAPS. I go down to MAPS. And again, this is all new to me. I didn't know what was going on. There was no mentor I can lean on. There was no YouTube or Instagram that I can look at. I'm just kind of going through the motions. All right, I am joining the military. We go down to maps. We all did the whole, and again, mind you, my mom coming from an immigrant family, right? There's a lot of, and I'm not saying that my deals are or anything like that, but you have those weird deals. So your mom's always like, hey, make sure when you go to the pool, you're not naked around any. You're like, all right, mom, like, sounds good. So, cuídate, mijo, right? Like, when you look at that stuff and you're thankful for it, bro. But so now I'm in this environment where it's like, oh, I gotta be naked now. Okay, sounds good. This is weird, right? You're kind of standing there like, dang, what the heck? And this guy wants me to duck walk and I'm pretty much naked. Like, this feels weird, right? What is this? And so I'm done walking, doing my thing. I go through the whole process. I go back and he says, all right, be here on this date, you're shipping out. I said, not a problem. So my mom and I go back. I tell her, hey, Ma, this is the date I'm leaving. She's crying, I'm crying. And so we get there, everything kind of settles down. I go inside and the Marine Corps recruiter's door is shut. Oh my God, it's weird. So we sit down, my mom and I are sitting there and then I hear a faint voice come from the end of the hall. It was definitely not Gunny Hines, right? It was, hey, are you guys waiting on Gunny Hines? I said, oh yeah, we're waiting for him. He was like, are you joining the Marines? I said, yeah, yes, ma'am. He's like, well, I had the Marine Corps ball this weekend, so I think he's going to be late. At the time, I didn't know what that meant. Now I know, right? Like, I totally understand why he was late. And she said, you want to join the Air Force? I'm like, yeah. So I get up, I walk to the end of the hall. She grabs her things, grabs her keys, grabs her cover. Off we go, right? And so I went to maps and I joined the Air Force. And that's how I enlisted in the United States Air Force. Join the Air Force, get to boot camp. And I alluded earlier in my story, I had a drill sergeant growing up. My mother was the scariest thing in the world, right? Love her to death. She's incredible, woman of God. Proverbs 31 woman, if you're a believer, light on, 4 a.m. praying, like just a good woman, but scary, right? And so when I got to boot camp, I was already kind of exposed to a lot of the things that were happening. I already kind of knew it was a game. You have these instructors running around with a round hat yelling at you. I'm like, oh yeah, you just want me to stand here? Literally, that's all I got to do. I'll stand here, right? However long you want me to stand here and just kind of run around. And I think a lot of the Air Force boots that I was with, this was their first time they ever had to experience someone yelling at them, having to be up at a certain time, having to clean, being responsible, right? Having ownership of whatever it is, whether it's just uniform, having your canteens full. So getting to boot camp wasn't really that much of a culture shock for me from a standpoint from a construct of discipline. It was more of a culture shock because of the people I was in a room with. There were so many people from different places, right? For me, that was the culture shock, kind of getting to learn these people, being next to people who are just disgustingly filthy. It was just that for me was a huge culture shock. In my mind, I thought, why can't this person just get up? Why is that person fat and joining the military, right? And at the time I was an athlete. So for me, it was almost like a game for me. I was like, wait a minute. You're telling me that you get to feed me, right? Something I don't even have to work for anymore. I just get to eat and I get to eat whatever because I weighed 120 pounds and I was 6 foot tall and they put me on what I know now as like the skinny kid program, right? And they actually would double ration me and I get to go run around the track. This is awesome. Like, let's go, right? So for me, I didn't have to worry about going to work to put food, water, and shelter in place for myself. So for me, it was almost a relief. Like, oh, wow. Like, and again, had no clue that that's how the way the military was. I didn't have any expectation of what was happening. Was it very real though, that you're training and you're potentially going to war? Yeah, like the drill sergeants would talk about that on a regular basis. Like, hey guys, let's sit down. We'd go in the bay and they'd turn on the news and we'd get updates about what's going down range. It was very real. They'd sit down and talk about that stuff. And so for me, I think it was a different time having had joined at that time because you were motivated, right? There was a why attached to it. Like, okay, I'm here for a reason. And that reason is potentially to go and fight. Again, at the time, I know some of you probably are going to go, this Air Force guy, he's not a Marine. What does he know, right? He wasn't an infantry guy. But again, I'm asking you to put yourself in my shoes as an immigrant. I didn't know that the Air Force wasn't an infantry. I didn't know there was an infantry. I didn't know there was a Marine, or I didn't even know, I don't think I knew what a Navy SEAL was until probably 3 or 4 years in. So I didn't know that there was a pecking order or a hierarchy. I just thought, hey, the military Air Force itself just kicks ass in general. So that's what I'm training to do. I'm training to kick ass, right? And that's how I took it. For me, I've always taken great pride. I mean, I'm 40 years old now. I tend to live a healthy lifestyle. No matter what I do, everything still bleeds over. Everyone assumes, they're like, hey, Hector, you know, you always look squared away. You always I get a haircut every week. You know, I maintain my fitness. Everything's clean. My shoes are clean, no matter what, right? Even when I go to the gym, people are like, dang, even when you go to the gym, you're squared away. People attribute that to the military, but I say, no. There was a drill sergeant before the death, drill sergeant. And it was my mother, right? She always said, mijo, you don't have to be rich to look well put together, right? You don't have to be rich to be educated. And the military just built on that. And boot camp helped me continue to hone in on those skills. And those skills that I learned in boot camp, whether you believe it or not, carried on through my military career. I leaned on that. It's how you do anything. It's how you do anything. It goes, how you do anything is how you do everything, right? Sorry, I mixed that up, but how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's something that I took away from boot camp. It's, Hector, we're teaching you how to do your shoes. We're teaching you how to fold your clothes a specific way because we need that to translate in the future when you're downrange and you have a foxhole and you have a range card, right? And now you have a firing limit. Like, how you do the little things affect how you do the big things. So that was my exposure to boot camp. As a new Air Force guy, I think coming in, again, I'm going to preface this by saying that, man, I can be the guy that's laying in a pile of shit and I look up and it's a beautiful day out and I say, hey man, it's such a beautiful day today, right? And regardless of the fact that I'm laying on shit. And so I know when you look at like David Goggins, I'll bring him into the context. David Goggins' his second book that he wrote, he talks about his brother in depth. And I think it hits home because when you're raised in a home where, raised by a single mother, but I had an abusive stepfather for a while there. Not trying to bring that into the folds, but it was a big part of my life. And when you look at having multiple siblings in your life, how everyone experienced different things. And I'm not here to share my siblings' stories because that's their stories to share, so I'll share mine. I've always seen things from a positive standpoint. And so I look back now, and maybe for me, everything was great. And for me, when you look at the Myers-Briggs strengths personality, or any strength personality, but I took one and it shows that I'm a wooer. And all that means is that I got the gift of gab, right? I can go out and I can meet anybody. I'll go in and I'll sweet talk the lady at the DMV. I go in, I'll cut the line, right? It's just who I am. And I think that I've always approached life like that. And where in a world where most people probably woke up unhappy, are probably miserable, probably not happy in their marriage, whatever it is, I show up and I'm this natural ray of sunshine, like, hey, what's up, lady? Like, they're like, what? And they receive it, right? And that's just me naturally. So I think for me, when I look at that now, looking back, I think that it provided me a different perspective on life and the world received me differently. And so for me, checking in my unit, it was, again, I hate to say this, but things were great, right? Like, had a great time. You learn new people. You're received well. You're a young airman. I was able to, at a very early stage in my career, when I went downrange, see what a bare base was and actually see what the Air Force did, right? Granted, the Navy has an Air Force, the Marine Corps has an Air Force, but the Air Force itself, we have our Air Mobility Command, where we have these giant birds, right? C-5, C-17s that fly in supplies, that fly in vital resources to the mission. And the job that I had as an airman was to defend that mission, right? It's, hey, I'm here to defend this mission. There's a quote that I use a lot with my troops, and it's every post is honorable in which a man gets to serve his country. And because of today's time, I kind of edit it. Every post is honorable in which a person gets to serve his or her country or their country, right? Kind of politically correct. But it's true, because I think oftentimes when you're as a young airman, as a young Marine, maybe you're not tip of the spear. Maybe you're sitting inside a gym and you're handing out a basketball. and you're like, damn, my recruiter screwed me over, right? Like, this is my job. If someone could sit there and say, hey, troop, yes, this is your job, but your job makes a difference, right? Those pilots that probably just went on a mission and potentially smoked some fools, right? And are back and they need to come to this gym to decompress, and you're the person they see, and you're freaking, hey, how's it going, guys? And you know, you are yourself. You're the gatekeeper for them to release some of that stress. They're going to love you. Hey, what's up, Jake, right? They're going to remember Jake that hands out the basketball. Jake at the gym's cool. Man, he's a good dude, right? Solid Marine, good guy. They don't think, oh, yeah, Jake with the basketball, right? No, they're thinking to themselves, I can't wait to have some downtime to go over, chop it up with Jake at the rec center and play some basketball, right? And again, leaders, right? It takes good leaders to get that. For me, I was able to see that very early on in my career. So I think being part of that operation, the training evolution rather, was great for me. It was formative. It was something I remember. Deployments. There are 2 deployments of other deployments, but jumping on here, I know limited constructed time here. There are 2 deployments that really shaped me. And you and I kind of spoke about this, and I said, man, 2009, I was a fob hobbit, right? I was in Kirkuk, Iraq. And when I got down there, they said, hey, you're going to be the physical security specialist, right? You're going to be in charge of the physical security here on base. And what that meant for security forces is that we look at everything, right? We look at the depth in the wire. We look at our tasks or our sensors on the wall. We look at how we position our towers. Do we have a quick reaction force? How fast are they getting there? So all these different base security processes, that's what physical security does for security forces. But what I didn't know, and again, giving some love out to the FOB hobbits. So a FOB, for the people that might not know, is a forward operating base, right? And when you're downrange in Iraq, you have different forward operating bases, and they're strategically placed throughout the regions. If you're in Africa, there's a couple of forward operating bases, and a lot of that big picture, right? How fast can we get birds there? How fast can we disperse our troops? It's all just big picture planning. Kirkuk, Iraq was, again, a vital to the mission from an air mobility command process. And also we had, the Army up there, the 10th Mountain Division was there with us. We had a few Marines. For the civilians not watching this, and I know sometimes we don't get into the granularity of things when we explain what we experienced. Most bases downrange are blacked out. Like, there are no lights. The second the sun goes down, that last call to prayer plays, it's dark, like pitch black. And you do that for a reason. You do that because as soon as that last call to prayer, which for me will always have a different connection, and I think a lot of veterans have the different connection to that, the second that last one plays and the sun goes down, mortar city, right? Like, just nonstop. Boom, you just start getting mortared. And they do that so that they don't have a target to pick point, right? Like, they're just kind of shooting from the outside of the walls, just hoping that they hit something. And it's a strategic move. And I think combat landings, right? If anyone's ever been in a part of a combat landing, lights are out, pilots are wearing nods or NVGs, night vision goggles. And it's, people throw up because you know that you're coming in hot, and these people are launching mortars, right? And trying to hit that bird. So when you look at it, it's even just the process of landing on your forward operating base is intensifying for someone that has never been in that environment, especially if you're young and have never experienced that. And even that, I laugh now because I always look back at deployments, and now I was a Border Patrol agent, now in the corporate world, and I get to travel sometimes first class, and I get to stay at the Marriott and all these things. And I sometimes get upset when my plane's late. Oh my gosh, it's late. But I remember that deployment, 2009, we were sent in a small team. And when you landed downrange, it's pitch black, everything's black, birds land, get out, right? They're like, get out, like, and then the bird takes off. Well, we get off, but we got off on the wrong freaking place. And so we get off this plane, and I got my guys with me, and I was like, hey, we're in Kirkuk, Iraq, right? No, you gotta get back on. So we're like, oh my gosh. So we're guys, and we're running. The bird's going down, like slowly moving, doors kind of shutting. And they're like, sorry, man. And the guy's just like, the crew chief's like, nope, we got to go. And boom, they take off. So my guys and I are stuck in Baghdad for a while, and we go into the PAX terminal, and they're like, dude, we don't have anything for like the next 48 hours. And we can't bed you because you're not on our list to show up. So my guys and I are sitting in this PAX terminal for 2 days, and they were like, all right, here's what you got to do. When the bird lands, so at night, right, the bird lands, run out there and ask them where they're going. I'm like, how do you not know where they're going? And he's like, dude, just do it. So every night we'd sit there with our stuff, and then the bird, we'd all run out there. Hey, you guys going? No! Boom, bird takes off again. You're like, yeah, you gotta be kidding me. So eventually we get a bird to Kirkuk, and you know, we get there, and we're like, oh my God. Even that was a mission. So you think back to things like that. But 2009, for me, my job, aside from being a physical security guy, in January, we got there in December, and in January we had the 2 birds go down for the 10th Mountain Division. I think that made it real, right? A lot of things had happened, right? But my first deployment was back in 2004, 2005, and that's when things were popping and things were going hard. 2009, things were still hot, but it wasn't as hot as it used to be. And specifically in Kirkuk, me not having an outside the wire mission, there wasn't a lot happening on a daily basis. But when those birds went down, it kind of created a somber mood, right? Like having that happen so early in the deployment. And so it just made things real. Not that they weren't real, but it just made things real. Having those 2 birds go down in January set the tone for the deployment. It for me and my young airmen, not that things weren't real, as I mentioned, it was real, but not having lost those lives, it solidified, hey, you're downrange, let's go. For us, we had different sectors. We had Gator sector was our hottest sector. They had experienced some vehicle-borne IEDs in the past, and it was hot for us. We worked with the Kirkuk police. We worked. They would bring them on base. We train them. So there was a lot going on, right? And even me just sitting here, I remember so much. Like I remember sitting there, I was like, what am I going to talk about? I want to talk about different things, but now that I'm sitting here going through things, gosh, you do so much when you're downrange. But I had a job that was almost like a secondary role. When the sun went down and the last call to prayer went off and the mortars would start flying, my role was to wake up, throw my Kevlar on, throw my vest on, my helmet, grab my M4 out of my wall locker, sling it, run outside in boots and utes, jump into a little tiny Gator, drive across base over to where we had our command bunker, go inside there and start calling every hooch to make sure no one was hit, right? It was just like, boom, hooch 1, blah, 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 yeah, all accounted for, boom, hooch 2, hooch 3, and you just go down, right, to get all 12 hooches. You're like, all right, sir, all accounted for. And then go back to bed, right? 3 hours later, you get mortared, you're up, helmet, gun. And then sometimes when you're driving down this thing, you're like, oh my gosh, right? You're just watching this and you're just in this little Gator and there's boots and you're freezing because it's January and it's northern Iraq. Got to a point where I just slept in pretty much my Kevlar. Like I had my vest on and I'd have my helmet and I'd have my gun sitting there. Because for a while there, it was just nonstop. Every night we just get mortared. And that was my secondary role, was to have full accountability as a physical security specialist. And I think when you look back now, like I didn't have direct fire, but the way it affected me, right? When I sleep now and we all have different PTSD from different deployments, but this one affected me in a different way where I'm always on edge, right? It's always, you go to bed, you hear the faintest thing, you're awake, you're ready to rock. And it's something I've never been able to turn off. You deal with it. Did those mortars hit people sometimes? Yeah, mortars. We had a third country national compound on base and they got hit. And I remember having to respond to that. And it was crazy, right? Like you go in there and there's just mutilated bodies from a mortar attack hitting them, and they're all third country nationals and they're all freaking out. Although they weren't fellow airmen or army soldiers, still human beings, right? And so these mortars did hit. There's also a loss of life. There was one of the helo pads, a mortar hit one of the mechanics out there. So it's just, although the base was wide and these mortars weren't always effective, you knew that every now and then they got it right, and every now and then they'd hit a target. And so it was very real. And so for me, as I've gotten older for a while, I remember listening to one of these not too long ago that they couldn't do fireworks, right? I couldn't do the 4th of July. And it was always been one of my favorite holidays. Coming back. And again, when you're there, you don't think about that. And you come back and you're hanging out with your loved one and the fireworks start going and you start crying and you're sitting in the car and you don't know why. And she's looking at you like you're crazy. And then you feel guilty because you think to yourself, how do I have PTSD from this? I wasn't out there running around throwing grenades in a room and knocking doors down. But it's the subconscious effect that occurs, right? When you look at Pavlov's response to certain things that cause traumatic experiences to you. And so for me, I couldn't do 4th of July for a while. And I remember balled up, right? Karen at the time, my girlfriend, she can attest to that. I just sit there and cried in her arms, right? I didn't know what I was crying, why I was crying, or what it was. It was just this response. And that was crazy, right? And for me, it was just shocking. And so that deployment, although, yeah, again, to the point that I just spoke and talking about, you know, my fellow FOB hobbits, or forward operating base hobbits, that they even had shirts. That's why I joke. So like FOB hobbit. Even though you weren't out there, like, I feel you. Like I had some PTSD from being on that forward operating base and not having left the wire. And it affected me. And I think that being on this platform, I can talk about it, right? And say, man, like, I had PTSD. And I think when you look at Danny Santos, right? Stories of Danny Santos, where I'm like, man, I didn't even experience half that in that deployment. I shouldn't talk about this, right? What I went through and what I'm experiencing, is it valid? Oh, it is. I'm here to tell you like it is, right? And you don't even have to be at a forward operating base. It could have been somewhere else that you experienced the PTSD. And we all reach a breaking point. For me, apparently that was a breaking point for me from being in that scenario. When I started the story, I talk about a civilian that might not understand the construct of it. Imagine someone just takes you and places you in a large compound, turns the lights off and says, all right, we're going to launch things that explode and it might hit you, but you're in this little space and it's supposed to, when they start going off, just get up, run, and go into a shelter. That's the construct that you're in when you're downrange, right? And you just go to bed and it becomes normal. You become almost institutionalized, almost like a few studies that they've done on people that are in jail, right? When they leave the jail, it's almost like they want to go back because they've gotten so used to that. Or if you've ever seen the jar of fleas where they place fleas inside and there's a limit and the fleas jump, and when they remove the top, those fleas don't jump any further because that's all they know, right? And so we've all experienced that where it's normal. And I've spoken to some veterans that, and maybe you even agree with me because I feel the same way. Sometimes when you look back, those were the best days of our lives, right? You didn't have to worry about going to work. You didn't have to worry about crying kids or putting gas or your civilian boss. It was just like, man, you were in a room full of brothers and sisters and you had a mission and you had food, water, shelter. And yeah, things happened, but man, best days of your life when you look back at it. And so for me, that was a big deployment. Yeah, while we were downrange in Kirkuk, there was also a big explosion that happened in June. And it had been a while since there was a big vehicle-borne ID or any type of big explosion with, I hate even saying this, but with notable numbers, right? Notable casualties. And when you're downrange, sure, is it happening? Yeah, like you'd have a vehicle-borne ID prematurely go off before the gate. You're like, dang, that was crazy, right? But no one's hurt. All right, we're good. But in June, there was a big explosion. And again, I don't know the full details, who was out there or not, but for us, providing support for all the casualties, a lot of them were children. And even yesterday, I was at a football game event, and I can't eat boneless chicken wings because I recall a lot of the little limbs, right, from the little kids, that when you see that, and I think it gives me goosebumps. And again, I think when you experience something that you weren't prepared for, and you see these helpless kids who were affected by the wrath of war, if you will, or what a man could do to another man, right? It just triggers you differently. and you can't really control it. And again, it's one of those things where you're just a passerby, but it's affecting you because you're there and you're in the moment. You're in the process, right? Getting these kids aid, rushing them to the little on-base hospital, and doing what you can to help these kids or even these casualties. It's hard. When I was in my active duty side, Dover Air Force Base was where they flew a lot of the soldiers, men and women who passed away downrange. And I remember one time going into the mortuary there. And I can't remember why we went in there, but we went in there and they said, hey, you're about to go somewhere where it's kind of shocking. You're like, okay. And I remember going down there, and what would happen is they would fly the fallen service member on the Dover Air Force Base, and they would take them into the mortuary or the morgue, and they would sanitize all of their personal belongings. And obviously they'd embalm the body and prep them, right, to hand it over to their family. But I remember going inside, and they had just shelves and shelves and shelves, almost like wall lockers with artifacts drying. There were dog tags, there were wallets, there were rings. And I remember walking through there, and it was just, man, it was emotional just thinking about it now, right? And when you would talk to these mortuary technicians, they would say, man, like, I'll never be the same again. Like, this is causing me, I can't sleep at night. I see these people, these service members at night, and I see their belongings. And again, they weren't in combat, but they were just in that environment and just seeing the effects, the emotional, just feeling it. So for me, I think that experience itself was also very shocking, very much like being downrange in Kirkuk and experiencing that with the explosion. And my goal, when I came on here, I said, look, I just want to jump on here and talk about certain things that I went through and experienced, because I think there's probably a lot of us out there that maybe went through a lot, and we're kind of not embarrassed, but we think to ourselves, well, I didn't lose legs, or I didn't do certain things, but we're still all affected by things. And I think that we're a community of veterans that are here to lean on one another. And some have gone through some other things. And I just wanted to talk about 2009 because I wanted to speak to a certain populace, that deployment. But that's something that affected me as well. So towards the end of my active duty career, my mom, again, single mom, raising my brother and my sister, she called me and she said, hey, Hector, I know you live in the military. And I was actually debating either doing the blue to green program that the Army had, because at the time, again, I could talk forever, but I didn't know what certain branches did. And I thought, man, I want to join the Army and go do Green Beret stuff, right? Be an ODA guy. And I was looking into that blue to green program, physically fit, all the stuff. I checked all the boxes, kept going to school. And my mom called and said, hey, mijo, I think it's time to come home. Your brother's going down. Not that he was in like gangbanger or anything like that. He was obese. He was depressed. He wasn't doing well in school. And my mom was worried. I said, you know what, Mom, I've got another 6 months. And she said, I don't think those 6 months are going to work, but see if he can do anything. So I said, all right, Mom. And it was hard for me. I remember going into the office, and it was back in 2006-ish. And I said, hey, look, there's a lot going on in my family. Is there any way I can, get out early? I'm going to join the reserves. I just got to go. And they're like, yeah, we actually have a program where you can do that. I was like, great. So I signed up for it. I was embarrassed to talk about it, even me just being on here saying that I left my post, so to speak, early. But I did it for a good reason. I did it to go home and help my kid brother. And I left active duty, went home, drove my truck across the country. And I'll never forget the first time I saw my kid brother. Because again, when you were younger and back in the days, you didn't have a ton of money, right? When I was in the Air Force, I became a volunteer firefighter. And so I went to firefighter school on the weekends for 6 months, because I just wanted to continue to do things. I worked at PacSun. The manager was super cool. And I said, hey, look, I'm active duty. I just want to make extra cash because we don't make a ton of money. And so every now and then, I wasn't like a full employee, but like, they'd let me work on like a Saturday if we were off, and I'd go in there and work 6 hours. And I was this cool California kid, like selling, stuff just to make extra cash. And so I head home, and I for the first time in a long time, I hadn't seen my family in a couple of years. And back then we didn't have FaceTime or, jump on Zoom or anything like that. And so you would see each other through photos, right? And I think that's why a lot of us who served back in the day don't have a lot of cool photos, because everything was Kodak stuff, right? And who carried a Kodak camera? Or a lot of those films, when they came back, they were no good because they were exposed to the elements. So I get home, and I remember seeing my kid brother for the first time. He's huge, right? Obese. Didn't even recognize him. And I remember I shut the door and I cried. And this part of the story kind of comes around twofold, because I remember seeing him that way. And getting out, I was like, all right, got to finish my education. What's next, right? Got to join the reserves. Check. That's what I got to go. That's what I got to go do. But going back to my original story, I wanted to continue to serve. And the fastest, quickest way for me to continue to serve this country and achieve the life that I want to live was law enforcement, right? So I thought, I'm going to be a cop, going to be a CHP officer, LAPD, LASD. I never really thought about the Border Patrol, but San Diego was always the city that I wanted to live in. At the time, the young woman that I was dating, she said, oh, hey, I know someone that is in a Border Patrol. You should meet him. And so I did meet him. And the irony behind that, right? An immigrant working for the Border Patrol. At the time, I thought, oh, this is kind of weird, but all right, I'll look into it. So I started looking at that. But I got out for a reason, and it was to shape my brother and help my kid brother. And I did. I volunteered at his high school. My kid brother played football his entire life, but I had stopped. And again, another red flag from my mom. Got there. I found they lived in a new city. They relocated because my stepdad he wanted to be a preacher, so he moved to Lancaster. And I didn't really know anybody there. But I show up and I'm like, all right, I'm going to find the lay of the land here. I find a guy, Coach Russell. I don't know if he's still coaching or not, but he's a good guy. And I said, hey, I want to help my kid brother. He didn't play freshman football, but going into sophomore year, I want him to crush it. Yeah, no problem. So he's a big kid. And now he used to play like linebacker or something. And now he's going to be a lineman, right? And so we get his footwork going. He goes in his sophomore year, tries out, and Coach Cortez at the time, he's like, who the heck is this kid and where'd he come from, right? And so my brother crushed it. And then Lancaster went on to have a pretty solid rally where they almost made it to the CIF a couple of years. But I knew why I got out, and I wanted to continue to give back to my kid brother. And I did. I showed up every day. My kid brother's doing better. I've got a job. I've applied to different agencies. They call me. I was going through combat arms school for the Air Force. It was a B shred. I was back in Texas training combat arms. It was a 6 to 7 month long school. And they called and they said, hey, we want to offer you San Diego. And I said, I'll take it with no hesitation. So when I wrapped up the school in 2007 for the Air Force Reserves Combat Arms side, I came back, went straight out to the Artesia Academy for the Border Patrol. At the time, as a Border Patrol agent, I had gotten injured. So I blew my left knee out tackling a bad guy. I always say bad guy. I'm used to saying that because my nephews and nieces, when my brother and I talk about it, we're like bad guy, good guys and bad guys, right? Cops and robbers. They call me and they say, hey, Hector, tapping you on the shoulder, you need to go downrange. The unit knew that at the time I was going through my Master's of Business program at the University of Southern California. They knew that I would likely have to pause life. But it's one of those things in the military. Now, even now, as a leader now, when I talk to my troops, they say, well, sir, I've got school going, I've got this going. And when I talk to them and say, hey, look, I'm not asking you to do something that I haven't done, right? There's a reason why over our hearts, we have Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and it's because service comes first, right? Then ourselves. And unless it's something detrimental and you've lost someone, more than likely going to have to go and answer your nation's call because that's what you signed up to do. And so for me, I knew that was the case. I was in between, and I alluded to my physical standard test, because in the Air Force, if you get 100%, you don't have to test for another year. If you don't get 100, you have to test every 6 months. And so when I got injured, I had 100%, and I knew, okay, I've got to get surgery, and I've got to go to PT, and I don't have to tell the Air Force about what happened to my knee, right? I could just fly under the radar, because if you've ever been through the medical program, it's a nightmare. So I thought, all right, I could just get my surgery done, get everything back to normal, get 100 PT tests, and I'm good to go. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, right? Because my knee was pretty messed up. I had to turn in all the paperwork to the Air Force, so I did. There was a couple people in the unit that, maybe they didn't like me, because not everyone's going to like you in life. But they thought that I was trying to get out of things. But all along, what they didn't know was I was actually trying to go on this deployment, right? Because they had tapped me on the shoulder, and I knew I had a medical thing to clear. And so I'm doing everything I can to clear myself. Then I walk in, and my leader says, hey, come in here. He's like, hey, what's up? And he's like, look, man, some people showed some photos to the commander, and they think that you're trying to get out of this deployment. And my heart dropped, man. I was like, what? You've got to be kidding me. Like, no, I'm doing everything I can to go on this deployment. And he says, yeah, hey, man, I don't know what to tell you. I said, no. I'm calling the commander right now. So I remember leaving the office, and he's like, don't tell. And I was like, hey, man, thanks for telling me. I can't. This is my character. So I remember calling the commander. They came in. They were off, and I felt bad. They brought their kids over. And we sit down. I'm using a neutral term here just because I don't want to say who it is, but we sit down, and I plead my case. I know that you received this. It's brought to my attention that you received this. And I want you to know that I'm not trying to get out of a deployment. And they said, yeah, you're right. I did receive all that. And I was looking at like some type of administrative, process, because that's what was painted to me. And I was like, no. Here's a full picture. These are all old videos. These are all old photos. I am on a waiver. I'm doing everything I can to get on this deployment. And they said, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me that. Push on. I said, roger that. I'll be ready. And I went back to my orthopedic surgeon and I said, I've seen every ortho in this office. I need to find one that I haven't seen so they have a fresh eye on my case. And so I said, hey, is there another orthopedic surgeon here that maybe I haven't spoken to? I said, actually, there is. One came in today. I was like, oh, okay. So I go in, I sit down, they open my packet and they say, this is your doctor? I'm like, yeah, I went to school with him. I'm like, no way. He's like, yeah, man. Reads through it, pass. Good luck. Have fun on deployment. I was like, all right, thanks, man. So I run out of there. I run back to my command. I was like, hey, I got cleared. I'm going on deployment. They're pumped about it, right? I knew my knee wasn't 100% yet, but I was doing everything I could to get back to 100%, right? Because I wanted to serve. When I was deployed in 2019, again, ironically enough, it was right after Christmas and New Year, so right around this time. And we're driving. She had a little Honda Civic. My mom was awesome too. I had again, I was deploying by myself. So I had my 2 giant bags. I went to bed. I wake up and my bags look better than they were, right? Just the shape of them. My mom looks tired. I said, Ma, why are you so tired? She's like, oh, mijo, I stayed up and I repacked all your stuff. I'm like, Ma, why? She's like, it was all messed up. And she starts showing me, all right, mijo, look right here. You have this, you have that. I'm like, what the heck? So my mom redid everything, right? I said, thank you, Mom. And we load everything up into a little Honda Civic. I'm driving from Lancaster down to Riverside. And if you've ever driven the 14, some nice scenic sunrises because you're going over the mountains. We're driving. And I don't know why. Like, my mom and I, we've had a great relationship, right? But I never really just sat down and said thank you to her. I remember driving and the sun's there, so it's just beautiful. Sun's coming up. You got the different colors. My mom's sitting next to me. I got a little bit of coffee, su cafecito, like my mom says it, right? Hey, mijo, te da tu cafecito. So we're sitting there, and I say, Mom, I know I've never said this to you. I just want to say thank you. And she says, for what? I said, for all the sacrifices that, you did or you've made for us. And I said, Mom, the older I get, the more I realize that you were this old when I was that old. And the things that I want and do, you didn't do. And it puts it in perspective, not just how much you sacrifice from a work perspective or your tangible sacrifices, but also from as a human being, as a woman, right? Like, you could have done different things and you didn't because you wanted us to succeed. And we just had a great talk, we're laughing and having a good time. And my mom and I always had a great relationship all the time. She drops me off. All of my military guys knew my mom because she'd make tamales and birria and all the good stuff, right? They all knew my mom. So it gives me a hug. My guys jump into a truck. They drive me off to Burbank, and off I go. I get downrange, and the reason why I said again it's my best deployment is because I feel like I was the best version of myself. I knew I was going downrange. I was going to be leading a team of active duty guys, some reservists sprinkled into it. And I knew that I would be challenged, right? Faced with challenges like, who's this guy? This reserve coming in to lead us? So I go down there. I won't get into those formative leadership stuff, but I'll talk about why this one impacted me so much. I remember even now, that team that I was down there with, we have a strong connection. We'll jump on Facebook or Instagram, and we'll rekindle. I was at a football game yesterday, right before this was filmed, and I actually ran into one of the guys in the stands. He happened to be sitting there, Mar Jason, and I'm like, Mar, what's up? Oh my gosh. And it was a good experience. Very early on in the deployment, I had a Red Cross situation where one of my troops, his father passed away. And it was the first time I personally was ever that close to a Red Cross situation where someone loses a loved one. I had heard of them, but I'd never really experienced one. And they came to me and said, they pulled me in the office, the commander said, and he's like, hey, one of your guys lost someone. I'm like, oh my gosh. And they haven't been able to get a hold of him. And I know that you might say, well, it's 2019. What do you mean they get a hold of him? Everyone deals with deployment differently. He wasn't married, didn't have kids, and he chose to disconnect. He didn't use like the pucks. We have like the Wi-Fi pucks that everybody has, or the Wi-Fi. He just chose to disconnect. I'm on deployment. I'm going to just be on deployment. And so his family called the unit called us. And I remember thinking to myself, before I had to go tell him that his father passed, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like I couldn't imagine this happening to me. I don't know how I'm going to convey this. I don't know what's going to happen. I would be shattered. And I'll preface that by saying this. My first deployment, I remember you couldn't call home. You had to wait a while, and the calling cards were a thing, right? You'd get these calling cards, and you'd go into this little room, and you'd call the different numbers, DSN numbers, to the base, and then the base would patch you through to your loved ones, and you'd have a calling card to use. And I remember telling my mom, I said, Mom, I keep having nightmares. And she says, why are you having nightmares, mijo? And I said, I keep dreaming that you died. And she's like, mijo, what are you talking about? I'm good. You focus on your deployment. And I don't think I heard it here, but we would operate at night, and during the day we slept, and it was so freaking hot, and it's too far to walk to the latrine when you're in a bear-based situation. So you had all these piss bottles, and you can't drink, and there are no pills. So I used to go buy Vicks, the Vicks, medicine, and I chug that so I can sleep, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one that ever did that, but I used to dream that my mom would die. And it happened. It was vivid. Like I'd wake up sweating, and sometimes, cause for those of you like newer troops, right? You probably don't know what a Harvest Falcon tent is, or all those tents. They're just open tents, and you'd sometimes separate them if you had wall walkers. So you'd have your cot. Eventually you got beds, and it was just an open bay. And down the middle, you'd have like a big AC thing, and you'd take water bottles to create your own like AC vents. My neighbor would come over and wake me up, like, hey dude, you're freaking screaming. And I'm like, what the heck? And I was dreaming my mom died, right? And so I used to tell him, dreamt that he died. Thought nothing of it. So my troop, go down there, I tell him he's heartbroken. It's tough. He leaves, Red Cross leaves, and we go back to normal. Well, in May, you have Mother's Day. And Mother's Day, obviously for us Latinos, not for everyone, but Latino culture, our mom is everything, right? So we go all out. I jumped online. I sent her flowers. She's up with my brother visiting him in Lancaster. And in my hooch, I had Wi-Fi. So I call her FaceTime. Ma, how are you? And I was like, smile, Ma. And I'd do a screenshot and I'd save it. And my mom's birthday was May 15th. So it rolled right over. Call her for her birthday. Hi, Ma, I love you. May 19th, wake up, do the normal thing. We all load up. We convoy from one forward operating base to the next forward operating base, where we were doing security stuff. I'll allude to where we were. And my team and I walk into the DFAC, or the dining facility, and I've got my gear on, and I've got my phone in my tack vest. And we all sit down, and I'm sitting at the head of the table like we always did, right? Just everybody's filed in. and my phone starts vibrating because we had Wi-Fi inside this building. I was like, oh, maybe my family's getting up or something, right? And so I grabbed my phone, and I remember Mar, who I saw yesterday, was sitting here to my left. And I was like, oh, my sister's calling me. I think it's the kids that want to say hi. And you know, when you're that close to everyone knows everything about everybody, right? Then you know that an uncle will love the kids and all these different things. You tell stories. And so I remember swiping on the phone, and I remember seeing my sister, and she's just bawling hysterically. I'm like, hey, sis, what's going on? I remember and it's loud in the DFAC. I put my phone in my ear, and all I heard was, she's gone. And I don't really recall much after that for a little while. We talk about how in some experiences you kind of just go somewhere else. And I knew exactly what she meant. I remember setting my phone down. I do remember setting my phone down. I remember looking at Mar, and I said, she's gone. And I think everyone knew. And it was dark out. I remember walking out, and that forward operating base was a new air base that we were opening. And they had landed the first couple C-130s there. And so there was 2 C-130s getting ready to taxi out, and they were running. And the DFAC wasn't too far from the flight line. And I walked straight to the flight line, walked past the security shack that one of my troops was manning. And he's like, sir, you okay? Well, he said, sir, you okay? And he said that tears were running down my face. I remember going out to the tarmac, standing between his 2 C-130s, and I just remember falling on my knees and just yelling, like, why, right? I remember just sitting there for a while, and just pitch black, C-130s rolling, and just completely defeated, right? The woman that had sacrificed everything for me was gone, right? Like my North Star. And here I am in the middle of nowhere, in the desert, an event that I could have avoided. I could have just leaned on the fact that I was injured. I could have been home and spent Mother's Day with her and her birthday. And I could have graduated my classmates. But these individuals that thought that they were trying to ruin my life, or that I was doing whatever I was doing, right? I had to show them to know, Hector. And so for me, it was a really weird moment for me when I'm sitting there, the juxtaposition between service to country, and then you experience what my troop had experienced, something that I thought never would happen to me. So I remember just crying and asking why, right? And I had a moment of pity there for a while out on that tarmac. And eventually I remember I felt someone's hand. It was one of my team members. And he's like, hey, sir, give me your gun. And so I handed over my M4. I cleared out my M9, and I remember getting up and just walking with them. And everything's still kind of hazy now, right? It's just, I walk over. I think I finished eating. I think the relieving team were gonna convoy back to base. So I remember jumping on with them, drove me back to our base. And I don't really recall much of the drive. And I went straight to the chaplain's office. I remember sitting with the chaplain, and then everything just switched from why to what, right? Immediately, like, it's almost like my mother came down and flicked me in the air or hit me with the chancla. I was like, hey, I'm gone. There's no one's going to come and answer your why. What are you going to do about it? So I remember the chaplain coming in, and we're sitting there, and then I just start talking, right? I was like, man, he's like, oh, hey, Hector, hey, Master Sergeant, that's tell I was a Master Sergeant. Master Sergeant, let's talk about what happened. I said, yeah, my mother passed, etc. He's like, do you know details? I said, I don't know. My sister told me. He was like, tell me about your mom. And then I just jump into gratitude and what she taught me, and I just start going off, like, and he says, and you remember he said to me, I don't know if I should be concerned, he said to me. But for someone who just lost someone who was the foundation of their life, and someone that meant so much for them, you seem to be okay, and you seem to be happy. And I said, well, chaplain, I said, don't be worried. I said, the reason why I had this moment, right, these last hours of grief, and because it's a natural human reaction, and I'm still grieving inside, but I've also realized, and And I had a moment with my mom, which I'll get to in a second. Before I said, my mom's always taught me lessons. And I said, I feel like she's teaching me a lesson right now. And the one lesson that in that moment I learned and I see now is if you're present, truly present in every event in your life, if you truly leave with purpose and intent, and you leave nothing behind. And I know it sounds corny, right? But if you truly leave nothing behind, and no matter what it is that you're doing, if you're waking up early, doing your bed, I know that there's a famous speech on it, where you're making your bed, and even though no one's going to look at it, you know that you looked at it, and you know that you did your bed, and you did your best. You can't walk away from that and feel like you left anything on the table because you did it all. You did it correctly, and it just dominoes in your life. And I said to the chaplain, I said, Chaplain, every moment, every day, every conversation I ever had with my mother, I was present. I let her know how much I love her. And I said, as a matter of fact, and I told him about the drive that I had. And I said, I don't know why I did that, but I did. And I said, thank you. And I said, those are almost like, it was like a goodbye with my mother. And that, if any of you that's listening to this have gone through, the Red Cross process, like you're downrange one moment, you're packing your stuff, and then within 48 hours, you're landing at LAX or whatever your main hub is. People have no idea that you were just downrange in the sandbox. You're just kind of like, oh my gosh, I've had 48 hours to assimilate back to society, and then wham, right? Like, Hector, we gotta plan this, we gotta do that for your mom. And you're just like, phew, it's a quick switch over, right? And I remember going through that process, and I'm very thankful for the Red Cross. So shout out to anybody that works for the Red Cross. I'm so thankful. My family and I are thankful for getting me home right away. The last lesson in this, and the reason why, and I'll get to how it affected me with the military, but the last lesson my mom taught me was, before I went downrange, I had this small moment of like self-pity almost. And I called her, I said, Mom, my entire life I've always given to people. I take time to sit down and mentor people, and I, give money out, and I launch business, and I'm whining, right? And my mom's response was, Mijo, the Bible talks about how if you give, you don't expect anything. And I said, yeah. And she's like, why are you expecting anything? And I remember I got mad, right? And I like to think that I'm a pretty emotionally intelligent guy. I remember I got mad. I was like, Mom, I'll call you back. And I hang up on her. I'm driving my car, and I'm like, oh, I can't believe she just said that to me. But then I pause, and I go, oh my gosh. So I call her back. I was like, Mom, you're right. I'm sorry I did that. And I say that she taught me another lesson, because I had to write her eulogy, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And I looked up, and in that moment, I remember standing up there, and my brother has a video of it. And I said I was going to start reading his eulogy, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell the story. And I said the story of this 500 or 600 people that showed up for my mom. I said, in this moment, my mom's teaching me a lesson, and she's teaching me a lesson that I'm not alone, and I do have people, and every single one of you in here is part of my circle. And even in that moment, again, taught me a lesson. But the reason why that 2019 deployment was a little difficult for me was because I almost didn't retire. I almost didn't make it to where I'm at right now in my career, because I built this path-loss response to the uniform. I didn't want to look at the uniform. Like, after that happened with my mother and I came back, I didn't want to drill. I didn't want to put on that uniform. I had this connection to that, connection of loss. And I think the connection of loss when you lose military service members is great, but I had never experienced the loss that was connected to my personal life, right? Like my mom, my brother, my sister, anything like that. And it was the first person in my immediate circle, aside from my dad, that I've lost. And it happened to be in uniform while I was overseas. And I didn't know how to deal with that. And so for me, I knew I needed help, and I raised my hand again. Earlier in the story, if you're watching this from the onset, I said that my brother was out of shape and I didn't recognize him. When I came back, I went through some PTSD, and I did a lot of drinking, a lot of partying, and I gained a lot of weight. And right now, yeah, sure, I might have a six-pack down here, but I still have some stretch marks here, because it was a small period of my life where I wore a size 42 pant. And right now I'm wearing 31s, and they fit great, right? I was fat. And not that being fat is a correlation with anything negative. I'm only using it to say that I had let go of who I was. And my kid brother, I was going out, my buddy Sam, who was in the military with me, was visiting me. And my kid brother walks into my room and he says, "Are you going out again?" And this is when I was waiting to get hired on law enforcement. I said, "I am." And he says to me, you used to be my hero. You used to be someone I looked up to. And you're not anymore. He said, you're disgusting. You're fat. And I remember I was sitting there like this. And I remember, a 42 size pant, man. Like, I was big. And I wasn't, some people are just naturally big. I was big because I was doing it to myself. So again, if you're out there, I'm not fat shaming anyone. I'm just saying that I had let myself go. And me looking that way was a direct outcome, right, of the things that I was doing, drinking, eating excessively, not working out. And I remember I got mad. I chased him out the house. What did you say? I'm running. And I remember I turned around and he had one of those brick phones that I had bought him. And he chucks it at me. And he hits me right in the back and he dropped me. And so I fell to my knees. And I remember sitting there and I felt, my kid brother had just told me that I wasn't a hero. And I'm fat and out of shape and I'm trying to move on in my life. And that moment I knew I had to change something, right? And that was a trigger moment for me at that time. I had to face it again after losing my mom. And I had to go to a counselor. And I said, hey, counselor, again, I raised my hand, right? Just like I did the first time, I did the second time. I said, I've got to deal with this. I went and visited my commander and I said, hey, sir, I don't know how to say this. I've got to re-enlist one more time before I deploy or before I retire. It was 2019. I'm getting ready to retire here in 2022 or 2024. Sorry. And I said, I don't think I can do it. And I said, my entire military career, I've given everything. I've shown up for my troops. I've sacrificed. And if I show up next drill or next orders, I won't be here 100%. And I don't think I can live with that. Like, I don't want to bring that type of mentality or atmosphere into our unit. And I remember he said to me, hey, Hector, in our military career, we all have to take a knee. And if you have to take a knee in this moment, I totally understand. He says, taking a knee doesn't mean that you're not going to serve. It just means that you're taking a knee, you're letting someone else lead for a moment while you recuperate. And I'll never forget him saying that to me. I expected him, I won't say his name, but he's an awesome, awesome commander, great guy, and just squared away guy, right? Like rode a bicycle to and from, like he was like the epitome of being in shape, right? And he did that because again, the same mentality I had, right? If you do everything right, the rest would be easy. And if your troops can see that you do everything, you take self-pride, everything else is easy, right? And I said, all right, sir, thank you very much. And since then, even now, it's been a struggle. Every drill, and it's like, grab my uniform, put it on, and I think of that woman, right? And I think of that moment, I think of those times, but then immediately I think to myself, all right, Hector, you're continuing to honor her. What would your mother do, right? Not why did you lose her? What are you going to do about it? And what difference is this going to make either in your life or someone else's life? And so for me, I tell that story because there's probably people out there that had that Red Cross call, and I've never seen a Red Cross YouTube video or anybody talk about it and talk about the effects of that. Because again, sometimes maybe you think, oh, it's not combat related, or well, it wasn't military related, it's someone they lost at home. But losing someone when you volunteer, swear, an oath, and you go serve your country, you have a moment of guiltiness, right? Because part of it, some could say it's selfish. Some could say, yes, you're giving back to the country, but you're also getting a reward for it. And you do, right? When we're at Starbucks and that kid says, thank you for your service, and you shake that hand and you get that free Starbucks, it feels darn good, right? It feels darn good to give back. When you exchange something, when you give someone $100 bill, you're helping that person, but it makes you feel good at the same time. Matthew McConaughey wrote a great book, Green Lights, and he says, it feels good when I give. And I'm not afraid of saying that, yeah, maybe it's vanity, maybe it's ego, but because it feels good, I want to continue to experience that. And so then I continue to help people. And so what if I do it because it makes me feel good? I also conversely do it because I want to help people. So it's this exchange. But for me, for a small moment, I didn't see that. And I felt like my selfishness to continue to serve and give back to a great country didn't allow me to be there with my mother. But again, day to day, growing from it. And I hope that my story helps someone that maybe went through that, is going through that. Just thought I'd share that. So I was a Border Patrol agent from 2007 up until 2021. I medically retired. Working for the Border Patrol or any law enforcement, first responder, government or agency or department, it's paramilitary, right? When you go to the boot camp or the academy, they always draw on that comparison. Hey, this is a paramilitary academy. This is a paramilitary operation occupation, and it couldn't be more true. You put on a uniform, you wear a badge, and you're issued a weapon, and you have penal codes or statutes that you enforce stateside, right? And your goal is to protect your fellow citizen. And it's an identity, very much like being in the military. You put on a military uniform, whether you're a SEAL, you're a sailor, you're a coastie, whatever it is, it's an identity. It's something that you embrace and you do for a long time. Mine was cut short. February 23rd of 2021, I was chasing a bad guy with my cool partner, who I digress, and I won't really say his name or the story, but not even a year before that, he was exposed to fentanyl. It was probably one of the most traumatic moments in my life. I had to save him with Narcan, and that was a crazy, crazy experience. We almost lost him, but it was crazy, right? And I received a medal for it, but that doesn't even do justice to what that experience that my partner and I shared in that moment. So my partner and I, again, Marine, right? Awesome dude. And he watches your channel, so he's probably going to know I spoke about this. Love you, man. Him and I, when we talk now, he's my carnal, right? And we're partners. We knew everything. We worked so well together that we knew each other's step. I knew he was a Marine, and he actually deployed when he was a Border Patrol agent. And I remember sending him emails and I sent him a care package when he was downrange. So we both came into the Border Patrol about the same time. He was a little senior to me. We finally worked together towards the back end of my career, right? Me leaving, and we had a great time. We worked at a checkpoint in San Diego, and him and I were every day catching something, right? High-speed pursuit, whatever it was, narcotics, just all kinds of crazy stuff. Every day was an adventure. Spiking vehicle. I mean, we joke, but him and I would be in the use of force training. So as a Border Patrol agent, every 3 months you have to go to some kind of training, whether it's use of force, weapons qualification, or some type of other training, right? And it was funny because quite literally for almost 2 years, and I actually just hung out with Jay, who was one of the Homeland Security use of force officials who looked at use of force cases and then either cleared you or didn't. And even he would give us shit because he would say, geez, man, like your name's on everything. And I'm not saying that with pride. It wasn't like use of force, like tasing people. It was like stuff, right? Deploying spikes, using equipment that we had, chasing bandits, chasing felons, chasing nauticals, chasing smugglers. So it was just a very dynamic time in my career. And we would sit down in these trainings and they'd have a video up there. And it was, lo and behold, it was my partner and I. We're just sitting in the front like, oh, partner, it's me again. It's you and I. And they'd be like, this is how you don't do it. And we're like, oh, dang. And then we come back like 3 months later and they have another video up there. This is how you do it. We're like, yeah, we did it right, right? And so him and I just had this really great dynamic. Anytime we did something together, he knew. It was like clockwork, right? We'd pull the individual out, boom, boom, boom. We search in the car. We just worked well. We knew exactly what we were doing. He also knew me. I'd sometimes get in this fatal funnel when we're in a high-speed pursuit, and I remember he'd smack me, and I'd come out of it like, oh, you're right, partner. Like, got to 10-3 this or cancel this pursuit. It's too dangerous, whatever it was. We looked out for one another. We had this guy who we're searching, doing a Terry frisk on or after stopping him. And he had a little white vial, and at the time, I think the guy, the subject said it was salt, right? And you hear the darndest things when you're in law enforcement. What is this? Oh, it's salt for my food. You're like, yeah, everybody carries salt in their pocket, right? All right, sounds good. So my partner at the time used the white powdery, he used the old test kits to test it. And I was dealing with the subject and all the admin side that goes through it, calling in for wants and warrant searches, doing that side of it. He's taking care of all that. And I remember looking over, and my partner leaned over, and he says, "My heart." And if I know my partner is incredible, incredible shape, lives the Marine Corps model, like fit to fight, like Marine Corps flag up, does crazy workouts every day. He called it, I eat like a Spartan, bro. So he's on a Spartan diet, right? Still Mexican, beans and rice, so a little bit of meat, but a Spartan diet. And I knew that something was wrong. And ironically enough, a day or two prior, we had gone through the Narcan training, because we knew that there was a large influx of exposure to fentanyl. And he was on his knees and shortly after collapsed. And I remember running over to his side and like grabbing him. One of our other team members thought, oh my gosh, this has got to be something bad. I'm gonna grab the Narcan. So he brings the Narcan over, gives it to me, pop it, give it to my partner. He comes back, right? And he's like, what happened, partner? What happened, right? And he's laying there. I grab his hand. He's like, what's going on? It gives him goosebumps. He's like, what's happening? I don't know what's going on. Partner, what's going on? And then he leaves again, and he's gone, right? Oh my God. Grab a second one. Bah, boom, hit him. Meanwhile, we're on the radio like, we need EMS. This is our location. Da da da. And he comes back. I remember grabbing his hand. And remember, he looks at me and he says, hey, tell my wife I love her, and tell my girls I love them. And I said, you're not gonna fucking die. You're a fucking Marine. I remember saying that to him. And I said, you're not gonna fucking die. You're a fucking Marine. And he went out again. We didn't want to hit him again with the Narcan. So right at that time, firefighters show up, EMS. I remember them just kind of getting off the truck. And I remember yelling at them, hey, it's one of ours. Not that they wouldn't move any faster for anyone else, but I just don't think they understood the severity of what was happening, right? And then immediately they sprung into action. We ran, grabbed them, tossed them in the back of the ambulance. I jumped on with them. I remember the young EMT was kind of freaking out, right? Because I'm not being emotional, but I'm like, hey man, come on. This is my partner. Like, let's go. Remember, he's shaky. I jump in because we all gone through combat life-saving courses, help him administer the IV, kind of calm the kid down. We're driving, partner's out, completely out. We get to the hospital, and this is like COVID time. Obviously, we get to the hospital, they bring him back, stabilize him. But the heartbreaking part of it was, his family couldn't come see him. So it's literally just me and him. And I'm relaying things. He was nervous. He didn't want to tell his wife because he's a good guy. Like, everyone fears the worst, but you also don't want to make that call. Luckily, we spoke to her. She's very calm. Went through that process. And I think that process was, although it was hard and scary, it helped the departments, right? It helped our agency because they were more aware of what was happening, and they jumped into action, provided better technology for the agents out in the field. So it was good outcome of it. My partner obviously still goes through things because of that. And now he's still in and still crushing it, right? He's a good guy. But going through that experience, and then having had lost my mom 2 years prior to that, my younger brother is now the county sheriff, and my sister's a teacher. And there's 3 of us. And I thought to myself, all right, Hector, maybe you got to kind of rethink things. I kept going to school. And so for those of you transitioning or still in the military, educational attainment and financial literacy, 2 things that I'm passionate about. Those are 2 things my mom knew nothing about. And you don't have to be an immigrant to lack either of those. How to manage and invest your money, and continue to educate yourself for the sole purpose of maximizing your earning potential and to someday be able to retire, right? But whatever that looks like for you, without having to continue to work. So those are the main reasons why I value financial literacy and educational attainment. And it doesn't have to be within the confines of a school. It could be in real estate, whatever it is. I continue to educate myself, and my guys would tell me, like fellow agents or military guys, like, dude, you own the business, you're going to school full time, you're a Border Patrol agent, and you're a reservist, you're crazy. Like, why are you doing all this? And I said, man, guys, I don't know. I just want to make sure that, like I always have options, or I have a platform for me. Like, all right, Hector, whatever, you're crazy. In 2021, it's at the end of the night, partner and I are standing at the checkpoint, and again, when you do something long enough, you know, and we hear an engine coming in, and you can tell when an engine's going to slow down, and we could tell, right? And we have them we call it point runners, checkpoint runners, when a car just speeds through a checkpoint, whether it's at the border, whether it's at a checkpoint like that one, which is out in a main rural area. We just knew. We knew it was going to be a runner. And sure enough, this SUV and speeds by us 60, 70 miles an hour, right? We had this really cool spike set that you can hit a button and it would deploy spikes. But it happened so fast that by the time we responded to hit the spikes, the car was gone. And so it didn't work, right? And the car flew by so fast that all of us were hit with gravel. We're like, geez Louise, that was crazy, right? So we all run. I had my favorite car, 2219, right? My Crown Vic. Jump in that thing, fire that puppy up, partner jumps in, go, brah, woo, right? Hit the lights, you're just going. There's nothing like the sound of a Crown Vic. And those of you that are not in law enforcement, and now they're phasing them out, nothing will ever sound like a Crown Vic, man. Crown Vic is, love that thing. So we're in a Crown Vic, flying. And unfortunately, my fault, took a little long, so we weren't the primary on the pursuit. We're a few cars back. And in law enforcement, case study has shown that Caravan, right? They said that anything more than 2 vehicles, studies have shown that the subject is more likely to continue to run. And so then they asked that no more than 2 vehicles pursue the vehicle. You can pursue with lights off and sirens off at a distance and allow the main pursuit vehicle to pursue, and then the second vehicle to relay comms so that the pursuit vehicle can just focus on the subject. And we pursue the subject, windy roads, stops a couple times, crashes into a couple civilians at a stoplight. We try to get out, gets back in, boom, floors it again. So we're going. We're coming around a big corner and I see smoke, right? And it's dark out. And I said, oh no, it's a crash and burn. Sure enough, we come around the corner. As we come around the corner, I see the subject vehicle had TC, traffic collision, right? I head on TC with the civilian, head on TC with another civilian, and that's where the smoke was coming from. But when I came around the corner, the other vehicles, wow, like slammed into this guy. I come around the corner, position our car just past the subject's car, and thinking, okay, like it's got to be down. He's crashed a couple times. When I went to get out of the car, he had managed to pull his car back, hits my car hits me, and that's where the injury happened to my hip. But again, I didn't know. I shook it off. I'm like, oh man, what just happened? I felt like someone just like literally like something just like a car hit me, but no, I couldn't comprehend what just happened, right? Because of the kinetic energy transfer. I get up, I run around. I'm like, oh man, the car is now trapped. Subject's car is trapped with my car. I run in and I'm standing at the top of the triangle. I punch my gun out, and I remember my thought process because I can see the guy. He's got his hands clenched, and I remember everything slows down, right? It's crazy how they say that. Like I'm standing there, and everything was moving so slow. And I remember hearing the tires squealing. And I remember kind of looking down, and the guy must have had the pedal floored. The tires squealing, there's smoke going everywhere, and this guy's just sitting there like this. I remember looking past him, and the passenger was like screaming because when the other agent's car had hit him and shattered his hip, and obviously he's in pain. He's like, my hip. And I looked over, and then my partner's sitting there, and he's got his feet up and his windows up. So he's got his gun out, punched out that way. He's not aiming at me, but you can't hear him. My siren's still on. This guy's sitting there. And I remember I drew my gun, and I thought, all right, I'm going to like muzzle punch this guy, right, to get his attention. When I went to hit, I didn't realize his window was up. So boom, I hit the window. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I remember with my support hand, I remember punching the glass as hard as I could, like to break this thing. And I'm like, Hector, this isn't going to work. And I remember I said, all right, like he's already hit multiple cars. I'm standing here. If my car gives, I'm going to get smashed in between this car. And I thought, this is it. Officer involved shooting, right? I've got to squeeze the trigger. I start squeezing the trigger. And I think when you're in the situation, you're hoping that that's not what has to happen. Luckily, a canine unit had pulled up and he had opened a door, and the canine obviously went in, and immediately, once the canine's introduced, most people de-escalate, right? So immediately, boom, canine's in there, guy stops, it starts yelling, right? And everything calms down. I'm like, whew, release the tension on my weapon, holster it, get the doors open. And immediately I kicked into, I was the on-scene commander. So I jump on the radio, I'm running. I remember running towards the civilian cars that had gotten hit. I remember running to a white Durango, and there's an older lady panicking. I was like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "I think I'm having a heart attack." I'm like, "Take a deep breath. You're having a panic attack, not a heart attack." Kind of walk her through that. I remember I ran to the other car. I knew it, he had hit him pretty hard, and it spun out. "Are you guys hurt?" And they're like, "I can't feel my legs." And like, okay, they look good. There's no bleeding. Triage, right? Okay, cool. Run back. The other agents who had been involved in an accident were already out of their vehicles and also helping. And they had a car full of illegal immigrants, right? And they're hurt because they've been in multiple collisions now. We calm it all down. After everything settles down, we got EMTs rolling and everything. I tell my partner, I'm like, "Man, my leg and my shoulder feel heavy." And he's like, "You think you're hurt?" I was like, "Man, my leg's heavy, my left side's heavy. We should get looked at." So I talked to the medic, and they're like, "Yeah, we should take you to the hospital." So jump on the ambulance, go to the hospital. Sure enough, I tore my hip up, complete labral tear, like a bunch of stuff that just tore up my hip, and then rotator cuff, like everything was just done on the left side of my body. I was like, "Dang it, man." And so I remember being in the hospital, they sent me home, and any of you know investigations, right? FBI gets involved, and I'm retired now, and not that the statute of limitations, the bad guy got 6 years in jail. And as a matter of fact, the other day I got an email. They're getting ready to release him. They're doing an early release next year, February of 2024. So I think he did 3 years served. But my best friend, Victor, I went to SC with, he calls me and he says, "Hey man, at what point are you going to hang up, the tool belt? You've been in the military for this long. You're in law enforcement." I said, "You're right, man. I think I really got to look into this." I remember at the time, I'm someone that again, going back to like the whole disability thing and how bad things are, I said, "You're right. I got to think of my family. I've already lost my mom, almost lost my partner, almost lost my life. I got to do something different. I want to be around my family." And not that I'm the patriarch of the family, but I took that upon myself. And so I said, I've got to change things. And so I remember I decided to resign. I walked into the office and I said, "Hey, sir, I'm resigning." And my supervisors, they couldn't believe it, right? They're like, "What? No, what? Come here. No, take some time, process this." I'm like, "No, this is what I'm going to do." And I resigned. I wasn't thinking about medical retirement or anything like that. I just thought, this isn't serving me anymore, so I've got to move on. Resigned, gun and badge. It's so funny. I laugh with people. It's like getting in takes forever. Getting out happens like this, right? Badge, gun, sign some paperwork, you're done. And I remember my supervisor calls me and he says, "Hey, Hector, you know that you can leave and you have 3 years retainability. If you change your mind, you can come back." And I said, "Sir, I'm the kind of guy that burns the ships. I'm not coming back." I was like, "All right, we have that option." And I immediately sat down with myself and like, "Don't get that out of your head, bro. There's no safety net." I've always operated on, my drive has always been predicated on fear of failure, because I never had a net, right? My mom always worked hard. Who am I going to call? My brother, my sister? I said, "No, burn the ships." I interviewed for a position that my buddy, company that he worked for, Smith's Detection, got the job as an account executive. I watched their video. We produce products that prevent catastrophic events from occurring. A lot of the technologies in the aviation field, a lot of technology is also used by our law enforcement personnel, to include handheld narcotic detectors. So for me, purpose was there, the vision was there. And now, it's funny because I shared this earlier, I found myself at an airport in a suit with a briefcase, flying to meet a customer for a big deal. And I remember sitting there going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. One of my buddies who's an attorney, he calls me and he says, hey, I know you left law enforcement, but did you file for medical retirement? I said, no, man, it wasn't something I wanted to do. And he said, no, Hector, it's not something you want to do. It's something you have to do. I said, well, hey man, I don't want to be that guy, right? The guy that did, he's like, no. So he takes on my case, he submits all the paperwork, and it was a no-brainer. Within like a week, the Department of Homeland Security is like, yeah. So they stamped my medical retirement. They sent me retired badge, retired creds. But I didn't want to, I was never going to do it. Had my buddy not looked out for me and called me, I would have never done that. Just because, again, call it ignorance, call it stupidity. But again, for me, I was like, no, I'm choosing to walk away. And I've never really told this story to anyone. So even now, like I look like I'm healthy and fit. I couldn't sleep last night. I might be okay, but I can't sleep on this left side. I have muscular atrophy on my left leg. My foot swells up. My left arm, when I sleep on it, it hurts. Like it's these things. I'm whole, I'm good, but I know that I couldn't do my job effectively if I continued. I stand for too long, I lose all feeling in my left foot. So all these weird things that are now disabilities that I think to myself, oh my gosh, I'm glad that I did this because I'm not okay, right? And a lot of you veterans, this is the law enforcement side, but it's the same thing for the veterans that are out there that maybe you think that you didn't lose a limb or something like that, but I strongly suggest that you get yourself checked. So recently, I haven't announced it yet to my company, but this will probably release after. I just got picked up by a dream company, Cisco, and I'll start with them in January, early January. And I share all of this, not to impress you, but rather to impress upon you that you have a lot available to you, whether it's education, whether it's mentorship, whether it's a fellow veteran that has already traversed a trail that you want to traverse. You don't have to stop right after you leave the military. Your life doesn't have to stop. You can transition. One of the coolest things I was ever a part of when I owned my CrossFit gym, there's a veteran community a veteran organization called Merging Vets and Players, MVP, in Los Angeles. And it's owned by Jay Glazer, the football announcer. And what he does is he takes former NFL players and vets, brings them together. Ryan Leaf, I got to meet Ryan Leaf and a lot of these other players that were troubled by different things. And a lot of the reason it was because they lost an identity, right? Their entire life, they were the star high school football player, the star college player, the star NFL player, and now they're nobodies. Same thing with the military. You leave the military, you lose an identity, right? Maybe you're disabled, maybe you're hurt. And so Merging Vets and Players was this really cool organization that I got to go up there, be a part of, train, and help. And what I'm doing to give back to the community, for me, my 20s and my 30s, I dedicated to going to school, building myself. And now that I'm going in my 40s, I just turned 40 this year, I'm going to be monolithic. But I'm going to be monolithic for a reason, right? I want to be able to take on passion projects and give back. That is the trend of my 40s. My 40s is investing in myself, financially and educationally, to continue to maximize my earning potential, but only have one track, one thing that I'm doing, so that it frees up hours to give back to the community. One of the ways that I've started to do that was at my current company. I started the very first veteran employee resource group, and we launched it about 2 years ago. They didn't have one, and since the inception, I've had guest speakers come on, veterans that I know that have shared transitional stories to help my current team members, right? Current fellow employees find themselves, whether it's the resources, whether it's career attainment, goal attainment, educational attainment. And I want to continue to give back, and I will continue to give back to the community by doing speaking engagements, sharing my story, and sharing with the veteran community that you can shake it off and you can take a knee and it's okay. And no one's gonna look at you differently. We're all here for you. We're all here together. We're in this together.